Hey guys, welcome to the Massive Iron Channel. I'm Steve Shaw. In this video, we're going to ask a controversial question. Should novices, beginners be focusing on barbell exercises as their primary tool to build muscle? Before I get into that topic, if you guys have any questions or comments, drop them down below. The best topic ideas I turn into videos just like this. All right, I'm joined with Fazlifts, and you can find him on Instagram, YouTube at Fazlifts. Is that correct?
Yep, Fazlifts are on pretty much all social media and podcast and YouTube platforms. Yeah.
So, Faz, we're going to ask a controversial. We're going to dive into probably what's considered a controversial topic, and I can't wait to see the comments on this. From folks that don't actually watch the video, but to lay the platform or the foundation, I was listening to a podcast, I believe Revive Stronger with Dr. Mike. And Dr. Mike mentioned that for beginners, novices, guys in their first 6 months of muscle building, that the neuromuscular demands of a barbell are fairly intense, and learning form is not always easy. And for that reason, barbell exercises, if you want to get out of the gate fast with muscle building, overly focusing on barbell exercises probably isn't the best thing to do. I just want to kick this off with your general thoughts on that.
Okay, so I think the controversy is because the advice that you generally hear from evidence-based folk or your old school bodybuilders is to, when you're a beginner, start with the basics. So start with your squats, your deadlifts, your bench press, your overhead press, your rows, your chins, stuff like that. So this kind of flies in the face of that by saying, actually, you don't want to do that because the barrier of entry is too high. You want to focus on machine exercises, which might be seen as a bit of a soft option. Now, in terms of how I broach this, I probably more on the side of what Mike is saying. So for a beginner, in my beginner programs, I don't have people jumping straight into squats, deadlifts, bench presses, things like that, or chins or whatever. So I'll generally have them on the machines which are available to them at the gym. I will go so far as to not even use dumbbell movements. Typically, it'll be machines. The only one that I sort of make an exception on is maybe something like a deadlift if they don't have a hyperextension. But if I was sort of to take that step by step, I break my beginners routines down into sort of the big five. I'm sure Steve's heard of that before. Him and I have talked about big five before loads. Some kind of hip hinge movement, some kind of knee dominant movement for the lower body. So that's 2. Then some kind of horizontal pushing movement, some kind of pulling movement, and some overhead sort of a pressing movement. So for all 5 of those functions, you can have machines which approximate those, and they get that person in the right groove immediately. So that person, the trainee, can focus on just perfecting the rep speed, getting used to the reps, making sure there's not a huge barrier of entry toward just getting in the gym and getting some gains, because that's really what leads into the hook of saying, okay, well, I like doing this, it makes me feel good, and I want to come back. Conversely, if there's a huge barrier of entry in terms of the barbell lifts, what might happen there is frustration in not being able to do it correctly, potentially even niggles, injuries, stuff like that, and it could put them off the gym and also just slow down in gains. So my stance is, on all my beginner programs, I have them using machines first, and we will progress onto the bigger exercises when we've built a little muscle and we've built some confidence and some efficacy. That's my stance.
So I want to just let the viewers know, Faz and I go a long ways back, but we haven't really talked in over 10 years. And it's interesting to see what 2 coaches come to as far as conclusions or philosophies. And what I just want to quickly mention, when I teach movement patterns, you mentioned knee, I do a squat type of movement for the hip hinge type of movement or a deadlift type of movement, and horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push, vertical pull. So I kind of focus on basically the same thing. Let's get back to the coaching aspect of barbell exercises. One thing I've done, basically the last 3 years of my life has been coaching. I've coached before that, but it's been one-off on powerlifting meets. And coaching someone to the point where they get to good quality form on squats and deadlifts where they can actually, when I say quality form, it means things are about 90% nailed, and now they can start to reap the benefits of this exercise as far as muscle building. It takes a lot to get the average person to that point, a lot more than most people think. 25% might get it out of the gate, or whatever the arbitrary number is, but for the rest of the pool, it's a process, and if you do it over the internet, it just kind of draws it out a little bit more. It's easier to teach in person, but not just for that reason, because it takes a while to get down form, but it takes a while for them to actually get to feel the neuromuscular, feel for the exercise where they can actually perform. In the meantime, there's value in doing what Faz just mentioned. But Faz, I was going to ask you, from a coaching standpoint, do you agree or disagree with me when I talk about how long it takes somebody to get up to speed on form on squats and deads?
Yeah, I mean, if I was to use my own personal example, I felt that I was making improvements in the squat, deadlift, probably bench press for the first 4 years of my training history. And I progressed relatively rapidly when I started competing after my first year. So I was competing with some pretty shoddy looking lifts, and they slowly improved over the course of 3 to 4 years, where I felt I had a mastery of those. So yeah, I agree. I think it takes a while to really see that 90% smoothness of form. Yeah.
So, one thing I want to get into is some of the, we've watched the swings over the years from programs, and, back in the days of Muscle and Brawn, we talked about basically everything. And we've watched over the last 10, 15 years the swing to 5x5 barbell focused programs. Before I dive into that, I just want to say, for the average individual, so you don't get confused, and I'll have Faz jump in on this and share his opinion. I think you already did. If you're starting out, we're not saying you shouldn't be doing barbell exercises. You probably should, under the supervision of somebody that can help you. But if you're looking for the most muscle bang for your buck out of the gate, you probably should be focusing 90% of your energy and steam on other things that aren't as technical or neuromuscular in nature, while working on these on the side. Agree or disagree, Faz?
Yeah, I agree. And what I wanted to do was just quickly run through the big five and just look at where people find the problems based on my experience, what I've seen. So like with the hip hinge movement, for example, I find that particularly difficult for some people because they find it very difficult to bend over without just rounding the back. So a lot of the flexion comes from the lower back, and that it can be quite a tricky thing to teach. Like teaching somebody to shove their butt back for the first time rather than just bend down, because up to that point in their lives, they may have just bent down and used their lower back or their upper back to round over and pick something up off the floor. Retraining them, that takes a long time, because you're looking at the habits of maybe 20 years up to that point, at least, maybe more. And then with something like a squat, I think most people are okay with squatting down, but squatting down with something on your back, that tends to pose a lot of issues. Most people just don't have that requisite flexibility to get them into a good squatting position without either half squatting or just going really wide, or having some issues with the hips, having like balance issues with the hips. So those are the two biggest ones that I've seen with the squat and the deadlift. What do you think about that, Steve?
Absolutely, I agree 100%. The deadlift, I find I have to get people to learn to be on their heels rather than over the bar, their weight over the bar. People tend to yank and pull on the deadlift instead of trying to stand up, which is a more natural movement pattern. I would say we probably we have the same ideas and maybe two different ways of teaching them. On the squat, I find like two different types of people. Number one, you have the folks that have a hard time getting their knee and foot alignment, together. Like their knees are a lot of times you see the knees way in of the toes. The toes are actually at a 45-degree angle. It's almost impossible to hit depth. So you have the nuanced people that you're trying to align those little angles in. And then you have the people that have been over consumed by information on the internet. They're looking down. They have to do low bar. They're wider than they should be. They fold like a folding chair because Mark Ripito said there's only one way to squat. And you kind of have to, don't get triggered, everybody, but you kind of have to pull them out of that cult and deprogram them and say that's not the only way. That's not the only way.
Yeah.
Transitioning from that, Faz, I would like to transition to the modern, and I think we're still there. I don't think people have caught up to speed yet on the modern science of hypertrophy, but the obsession with pushing barbell-centric 5x5 programs on novices and beginners. And I'm just going to quickly state that I don't see many people getting any quality results at all off these programs. Somebody in the comments section will say they will, and I don't doubt it, and I'm not saying you can't. But what I'm saying is it's kind of a program at its heart, at its core, that is setting people up to fail. And I have tried to caution people with running these programs, and man, I've taken so much heat over the years as being an idiot. Barbell-centric 5x5s. Obviously, a 5x5 is just an arbitrary set and rep scheme. There's nothing wrong with it, but I don't feel it's the best way for beginners, and that might be a topic for another video. But the barbell-centric, where you have a minimal amount of exercises, Faz, and they're almost all barbells or chin-ups. What are your thoughts on that for beginners?
Again, it's quite funny because, we've not talked for a while, but my listeners will know how much I've moaned about 5x5 and 5-3-1 over the years. It's definitely not something that I'm hugely in love with at all. Like, I really think it's a pretty, yeah. So anyway, without taking pot shots at people, let me just state precisely what I don't like about it. So 5-3-1 seems to be very popular. And so 5-3-1 is this cycle of very, very low volume. The original incantation is very low volume, and it's a lot of repetitive movement on the barbell basics. Now, my issue with that is twofold. One, we're starting a beginner off with all-out sets of squats. So like a top set of a squat every week, a top set of a bench every week, a top set of a deadlift every week. The issue I have with that is that that's a lot of high-end work for somebody who doesn't really have the foundation to be able to do high-end work. I would rather have them do a lot more sets across and really build in that volume. Second thing is frequency is really low. And for a beginner, they could go and do a nice, decent set of squats relatively well and hit that again maybe the next time a week, maybe even 3 times a week, depending on how weak they are, And then lastly, the amount of volume there just doesn't seem to be enough to cause any rapid kind of improvements. You're really missing out on opportunities to hit it more often or to hit it with a little bit more volume. It's just more practice. I think most of the viewers might be familiar with the idea of ladders for chins, a very popular way of getting better at doing chins. It's the same principle, really. It's just learning the movement, becoming better at it, practicing it. The whole idea of 10,000 hours of practice to perfect a task. It's a similar kind of concept. So getting a beginner on a routine where they're doing one top set of squats a week is a tremendous way of making sure they don't get very much practice and they remain bad at the movement. So those are my 3 sort of points on that. It's, yeah, go ahead.
So that was on Wendler's. How about just, unless I missed anything, just the barbell program, strong lifts. People are using starting strengths for muscle building. He even had, and not a pot shot at Ripito, but he had some claim where somebody gained 42 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks. We all know it's nonsense, but that's a point aside. But using these types of programs, these minimal 5x5 strong lift starting strength for muscle building.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, just from the off, I'm not sure Ripito is probably the best person to discuss body fat percentages with, just based on evidence. But I'd say with regards to just barbell lifts, obviously there's more frequency with the 5x5. So you've got that. However, I think it comes down to the whole form thing again as well. I'll give you an example from what I did when I was younger. I found in terms of squats, the more mass I built on my quads, the better my squats looked. I was able to be more upright. I was able to do things correctly. It's sort of the same with the deadlift as well. The better built my back was, the more I was able to deadlift. Now, initially, beginners, they're not very built by definition. So the form for the squat and the deadlift isn't really that great. So I've found certainly building up a bit of muscle mass on machines, on exercises where they are just locked into a groove, means that when they transfer to a barbell, those movement patterns are almost forced. Because if you're sat in a machine, you can only really push one way. So the machine forces you to learn that movement pattern in a sense, unless you really screw it up. So when you transition to a barbell, you're that much better. And the best example of that I can give is the bench press. That almost inevitably comes across with no problems whatsoever. People can chest press for 6 months to a year, transition them to a barbell, they are absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. So yeah, I think if you have a decent squat machine, transfer to a barbell squat, I tend to see the same as well. So yeah, I still have an issue with the barbell lifts in the sense that there's quite a steep barrier of entry to working hard and seeing results.
So, Faz, I want to end with this thought, and this might be a little off topic. I don't think so. There's some evidence, for hypertrophy that a dumbbell using dumbbells for volume might actually be better. I'm not saying they are, but might actually be better than barbell exercises. And for that reason, obviously we're not telling folks you can't go to the gym and barbell bench because we would be heretics. But when it comes to dumbbell bench, how would you prioritize them in the long run compared to barbell? Do you put it as try to get equal work, or would you tend to focus more on dumbbell work for hypertrophy?
So I think if we separate the two, I see this as two separate issues in a sense, and I'll get to your question. I think when we're discussing beginners and barbell lifts, there's the barrier of entry, first of all. So how can we get that beginner great results within the first 6 months, which I think is then separate from what is best for their long-term progress. So it's sort of audience specific. So if we go to the dumbbells, personally, I'm a huge fan of dumbbells. I think they're a great movement. And typically we see dumbbells being able to pull out wide, and then come in a little bit narrower. So it's a much more natural movement arc. I tend to find with barbell benches, you've got a very unnatural movement arc with the arms, and the elbows sort of have to adapt to that, and the shoulders have to take the brunt of that. My issue with that is the dumbbells provide you with a much more natural movement path, just like machines. So not a massive fan of barbell bench. I think there's a lot of ego attached to the lift, and it's caused a lot of injuries over the years. I don't necessarily think it's an endurance movement in itself, but I think dumbbells are, I will go on a limb and say, potentially dumbbells are better for development than a barbell. I think, but obviously if you're still interested in strength, you've got a barbell bench press. But I like the idea of being able to train the range of motion and the movement in a way which perhaps better mimics and gets a chest contraction rather than being locked in with the barbell bench.
Yeah, and one reason I just want to let people know, one reason I wanted to touch on dumbbells is because so many people come to me for coaching and programming, and they want to do barbell. They talk about squats, they talk about deadlift, they talk about bench, but there's no equal passion or, when I include dumbbell exercises in programs, it's kind of like, okay, I have to do dumbbell exercises. It's kind of a little bit like that. So,
gotcha. I think if I can just add one thing to what I was saying, then in that case, I think certainly in the UK bodybuilding scene, there's quite a lot of emphasis placed on dumbbell weights. Like, when you or I were coming up, it was all, well, when we were talking back in Muscle Brawn, it was all 3-plate bench, 4-plate squat, 5-plate deadlift. But there are similar landmarks for dumbbells. Like if you can row the 80s, you're strong, 80 kilos, If you can dumbbell bench press the 70s, you're strong. So I think there's like similar measures for dumbbells. Maybe that's more of a UK thing, I don't know, but perhaps we need to promote that more.
Well, I will say when I present dumbbell standards, if I'm sitting in a room of 20 men, 19 and a half jaws will smack and hit the floor and crack. Because, on dumbbell rows, I constantly preach, you have the potential to get a lot stronger than you are now. I mean, I've trained teens and they're rowing 70s, 80s within a month, 70, 80 pounds, that is for reference. and that's a teen, that's 130 pounds. And I have, men that are rowing the same, like you have a lot more potential to row than you think. So I would say in the U.S. or most of the people that come to me, when you present dumbbell standards, it's more of a case they've never heard it before. They're okay with a 315 bench, and they're okay with the concept of a 315 barbell row. But if you tell them,
Yeah,
hey, my dumbbell row was 200 for 27, it's like,
yeah.
Right. So, any final thoughts, Faz, before we hop off? I just want to say real quickly, we are not against learning the barbell movements, but if they are the 80% of a novice or beginner program, it probably need to flip that a little bit and put your focus on some other things while learning them in the periphery. Any final thoughts, Faz?
Final sentiment, just one step further. I have been a very big proponent of getting good at the barbell lifts when you're experienced. And the reason that I am a proponent of that is, this is past the beginner stage. The reason I'm a proponent of that is if you can squat, deadlift, overhead press, and row well, odds are you can do most of exercises in those movement patterns well. So I am a big fan of learning how to squat effectively. I am a big fan of learning how to deadlift effectively and bench effectively and overhead press effectively. If you can do all those things with all the nuances of each and every lift, odds are when you get to the variations or the machine lifts, you can do those tremendously well as well. So I am a fan of perfecting those over the course of your career. I guess similar to the point I made earlier, let's just try and separate the two. You're a beginner. You've just come in the gym. You want to make some gains. Okay. What is appropriate for you is not going to be appropriate for me and Steve. And what is appropriate for me and Steve might not be appropriate for somebody who's just transitioning into the intermediate stage and maybe having a barbell bench as one of the chest press exercises that they have in their routine with dumbbells and with machines and with cables. So there's a level of appropriateness that we have to bear in mind. And in this small little segment, we've been discussing beginners. And yeah, I think we're both in agreement. For beginners, let's not have learning the barbell lifts as a barrier of entry. Let's just get them straight onto machines and gaining. Let's get some gains.
Yeah, let's get some gains. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than hitting the ground running and realize you're not actually on the ground running. So, all right. Yeah, I just want to encourage everybody to support Faz on YouTube. I'll try to drop the links down below to his YouTube channel and his Instagram. Please check him out. I've known him for a long time. There's few men I respect as much as Faz. So please follow him. And if you'd like to see him back on the channel, I'd love to have him on once a week for a topic. If you have any topic ideas you'd like for us to discuss, have at it. All right, Faz, we'll talk to you later. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.